Welcome back to episode 2 of the Origin of My Faith series. Today we are going to talk about the concept of intelligent design and how the systems, nature, and circumstances of the creation of our universe point toward that creation being purposeful and intelligently done rather than coincidental. Please enjoy. So let's get into part 1 here. God as the creator, right? So this one's going to be the easiest for me. I used to be agnostic, and I was for a long time. And so I've always believed in a higher power of some kind. My belief in the existence of a creator or creative force outside of our universe is based on two main principles. And they are one, the principle of intelligent design, and two, moral relativism. And so we're going to start with intelligent design. I'll break down what that is and why I believe it points to God here. So to put it simply, the complexity and specificity of the order of our universe points toward its design being intentional rather than coincidental. The makeup of the systems on this planet that allow for life to exist are so unbelievably complex and yet so perfectly tailored to support it that it is more probable that it was designed that way intentionally rather than occurring by accident. And so there are many examples, but one that I really like a lot is found right here in our own DNA. Our genetic code, also known as DNA, holds information that makes us what we are. It is what is referred to as an information-based system, meaning that one, it contains and stores information, and two, it gives instructions as to what that information is and does. And so to give you an example, my genetic code contains the information that, I have brown eyes and brown hair and white skin. So the DNA itself holds that information within it and gives my body the instruction to express it externally in the way you can see right now. And so when you look at every single other body of specified instructional information, which is information with a purpose and a goal, when you look at everything else that falls under that category of being, you see that it always comes intentionally from an intelligent mind. And just to give you a few examples here, books have an author, recipes have a chef. And the analogy that I think works best here when we're trying to connect this to DNA and make a comparison, blueprints have an engineer or an architect that designed them with the purpose of creating something. And so when you look at all of these things that are referred to as an information-based system, every single one of them comes from purposeful creation, and DNA falls under the same category. Because of that, it is reasonable and intellectually honest to say that DNA would also come from purposeful creation, because there's not an example where anything of this kind doesn't come from purposeful creation. And so if DNA was created purposefully, then that means that there is at least an intentional creator of human beings. And so, as I said earlier, that's just one example that I think works very well, kind of trying to explain the systems that we can see in our, in our universe that have the implication of intelligent design, but there are so many other examples across all the different disciplines of science where there's a system that points toward there being a reason and a mind behind its creation. And so, earlier I said that it is more probable that it was designed that way intentionally rather than by accident. And so I said this earlier, I'm not just going to say something like that and expect you to take me at my word. And so we are going to instead reference somebody that is much, much smarter than I am. If you are into the world of intelligent design and science-based theology. You've probably heard of Roger Penrose before. He is one of the most quoted physicists when it comes to this topic, and I would like to talk about information from two of his books. The first, written in 1989, is called The Emperor's New Mind, where he explores the relationship between computers, consciousness, and the laws of physics. And in chapter 7 of this book, he calculates the ratio of two variables, which he calls V and W. You could say X and Y if you wanted to, but he uses the letters V and W. V is the estimate of the total phase space volume available at the beginning of time. And we're going to break down these definitions here in a little bit. W is the actual total phase space volume that was necessary in order to provide a universe compatible with both the second law of thermodynamics and that fits into what we now currently observe the nature of our universe to be. So the definition of the term phase space, which is used in those, phase space is a mathematical construct used to describe the complete set of possible states in a physical system. So put it in, again, this guy's a lot smarter than I am, but to put it in the simplest terms that I can, the ratio he found is the ratio of the number of all the possible states the universe could have had at creation divided by the number of states the universe could have had that are compatible with the second law of thermodynamics and compatible with what we have observed in our universe today. So the first number is going to be bigger than the second number. And what we have observed in our universe today is that we live in a low entropy ordered universe. And so the number he found is 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. And so to interpret that number a little bit, essentially what he's saying here is that out of all the possible initial conditions the universe could have had, only one in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123 would lead to a universe like ours. That is an infinitely small number. And in his book, he describes it this way to kind of drive home how infinitely small that number is. Even starting with a 1, he says, even if we were to write a 0 on each separate proton and on each separate neutron in the entire universe, and we could throw in all the other particles as well for good measure, we should fall far short of writing down the figure needed. So that is insane. He goes on to say that the precision needed to set the universe on its course is seen to be in no way inferior to all that extraordinary precision that we have already become accustomed to in these superb dynamical equations which govern the behavior of things from moment to moment. So what he's saying here essentially is that the conditions that were set at the beginning of the universe that caused the very nature of the universe to be what it is are equally as precise as the laws and equations that govern the behavior of everything over all of time. And so I guess what he's referring to here are things like the laws of gravity, Newton's laws of motion, like E equals mc squared. Laws, and these aren't theories, these are like laws that govern the universe that are always applicable, constant, never changing, and perfectly precise. He's saying that the universe was made with precision that is equal or superior to those, which is insane and awesome. And then he goes on to ask, why the Big Bang would be so precisely organized. When you look at things like black holes or singularities, which are commonly viewed to be the antithesis of the Big Bang created everything, black holes destroy everything, so beginning and end. He says, why would the Big Bang be so precisely organized when singularities or black holes would be expected to be so totally chaotic? And so before we get into the answer that he gives for that question, let me give you some context for the way he wrote this book. Throughout the book, he uses the term the creator metaphorically to refer to whatever it was that triggered the Big Bang. It could be God, or it could be the person that programmed the simulation we live in, or it could be some other mathematical scientific construct that humanity hasn't discovered yet. He doesn't really specify. He doesn't take a stance. And in his own worldview, he describes himself to neither believe in the existence of a God outright or deny the possibility of a God existing. So he has a pretty neutral stance here. But then to answer his question about, why would it be so precisely organized? I'm going to quote him directly here. He says, "What we appear to find is that there is a constraint at initial space-time singularities, aka the Big Bang, but not at final singularities, black holes. And this seems to be what confines the creator's choice to this very tiny region of phase space. That is, this very tiny set of possible states that could allow the universe to be the way it is." And he goes on to say that to understand what that constraint might be, we would need to understand where the second law of thermodynamics came from. And unfortunately for us, that is a frontier that science has not yet reached. So kind of to summarize what the heck I'm talking about, what we know so far is that there is a constraint placed on the creator's decision to create the universe the way it was created so that it could be created with order. Whatever force drove creation did so on the condition that it was done with order. Whatever that force might be, it was constrained by the idea that the universe had to be created in an orderly fashion. What that constraint is, we don't exactly know at the time of his writing in 1989, and as far as I'm aware, we don't know today. But that brings us to his next book. It was written in 2004. It's called The Road to Reality, where he attempts to describe as clearly as possible our present understanding of the universe. And in chapter 28 of this book, he writes something that kind of stood out to me, very on brand for what we've been talking about so far. He said, "We do not need a Big Bang to be in its observed uniform configuration. We do not need the second law at times earlier than life was around. It would be far cheaper for the creator to not bother with that." And so that first sentence, I'm going to read it again. That first sentence, he says, "We do not need a Big Bang to be in its observed uniform configuration." That first sentence refers to the constraint we talked about earlier, where for some reason the universe was made in a way that made the second law of thermodynamics true when it did not have to do that. So he's saying the Big Bang didn't need to be the way it was in order to make the universe. And then comes the rest. I'll read this again. He says, "We do not need the second law at times earlier than life was around. It would be far cheaper for the creator to not bother with that." And so it would have been easier for the universe to exist if it was made in a way that didn't allow for life to exist. But for some reason, the creative force that initiated existence took the extra steps to create it in a way that allowed for life to exist. Why? We don't have the answer to that question. But he goes on to say that all of this is simply reinforcing the argument that it is indeed misconceived to seek reasons of the above nature where suitable universe conditions are supposed to have come about from some kind of random initial choice. So he's kind of discrediting the idea that this is all random. There was indeed something very special about how the universe started off. It seems to me that there are two possible routes to addressing this question. The difference between the two is a matter of scientific attitude. We might take the position that the initial choice was an act of God, or we might seek some scientific/mathematical theory to explain the extraordinarily special nature of the Big Bang. And so he gives us these two options. It's either an act of God, or there is some sort of scientific or mathematical explanation that we haven't really gotten yet. And so he goes on to say he prefers that second option. As of his worldview right now, he doesn't believe in a God. And I think it's fine that he prefers to go the second route, where we do pursue science and math and try to figure out a reason based on those to why the universe was made the way it was. And I'm also all for that. I am of the belief that if you go down that path, it will eventually turn you to God. But this does discredit the idea of creation being random. And so there are kind of three main takeaways that we can have from what I've been talking about related to him and his work and these two books. The first being the probability that the initial conditions of the universe were what they are is infinitely small, like ridiculously small, that the universe was made the way it was at the beginning. Two, there was some kind of constraint placed on those conditions that was not necessary and actually made it, metaphorically, as he describes, more expensive for the creative force to create the universe. And three, that those conditions and that constraint are what eventually allowed for life to exist. So something went out of its way to create the universe in a way that allowed for life to exist when it did not need to do that. What that might be, it would be preposterous, and I guess maybe the word I'm looking for is, it would be presumptuous for me to say that I have the answer to that question. I don't. But all in all, not only can we say that the universe was created with some sort of intentional, intelligent design, we can also say that that design is responsible for the creation of human life ultimately. And so the other main argument that I have for intelligent design, you've probably heard this before if you're into the scientific theological space, is that nowhere in life does, or nowhere in our universe does life come from non-life. Something has never been shown to come from nothing, and so there must be something outside of our universe that propelled all of the everything inside of our universe to exist in the first place. And so for life to exist, that something must be living. That is essentially all I have in terms of an argument for intelligent design. I think some of the smartest people in the entire world are of the same belief that there is some kind of purpose behind our universe being created the way it was, and that it wasn't random. Thank you guys for watching episode 2 of the Origin of My Faith series. Tune in tomorrow, where we are going to talk about the necessity of God's existence in order for morality to be based in reality. Thank you again, and God bless.